Hello there, everyone. It's the early to middle of June. The Electronic Entertainment Expo, otherwise known as E3, is in full swing. We're hearing all kinds of stuff about games. And with all this going on, I have to ask one simple question. What the hell is going on with the World of Darkness video games coming out soon? So, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, earlier this year we got the announcement of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. A very exciting announcement for me, but as we dug deeper, we discovered a lot of warning signs that make it sound like this game is going to be another example of the patented get woke, go broke. Well, I decided to hop on Facebook because I had just heard that another game became Epic Store exclusive, so I was going to get on and rant and post about how Epic is just a literal cancer sweeping across the gaming industry. But then when I got on Facebook, I was immediately greeted by several updates to a game that I had been following and I had been incredibly excited about. The second World of Darkness game. Quick explanation. The World of Darkness is a universe created by White Wolf, and it is a setting for all kinds of things that go bump in the night. Vampires, werewolves, even though they're not like normal werewolves, and I'll get to that later. Mages, Prometheans, fairies, fae, demons, the humans that hunt them, etc., etc. They have a lot of games that are all blank the blank. Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Hunter the Reckoning, Demon the Fallen, etc., etc. And, well, I had heard that my hands-down favorite World of Darkness setting, Werewolf the Apocalypse, was getting a video game. An official video game, and I was so excited because I love Werewolf the Apocalypse so much. I even have some B-roll footage here that I was recording for a Vampire the Masquerade 2 video I never made, showing that I own most of the Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th Anniversary Edition books that were released, along with Demon the Fallen and Hunter the Reckoning. I just love the setting. It's very interesting, and it's a very unique take on werewolves, just like how Vampire the Masquerade is a relatively unique take on vampires. Well, I saw that they had posted updates. They had finally gotten a new name aside from just Werewolf the Apocalypse, the official video game. It is now called Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood. Badass sounding name. They also got a badass site update as opposed to just the bland picture that was on beforehand. And then I decided to look through the new concept art they posted. There was one picture in particular that had a line in it, or a line that was posted by the Werewolf the Apocalypse game account along with the picture, that had me a bit worried. I'd promised never to use these powers again, but some promises you can't keep. And after I saw that, I started looking through the comments and saw a lot of red flags. Not as many as Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, granted, but still quite a number. So I want to talk about all the new information that's been released about this game and what I think is going to happen with it. Before I start talking about the game, I'll give you a quick crash course on what Werewolf the Apocalypse is about and what the werewolves and lore are like. In Werewolf the Apocalypse and in the World of Darkness in general, most things relating to werewolves are thrown out the window. There's no such thing as lycanthropy. So in other words, there is no virus, there is no disease or curse that turns people into werewolves. They pass it down hereditarily. They tend to breed with humans and wolves that have parts of their genes in them which are known as kinfolk. Additionally, they are not brainless monsters that once the full moon comes up turn into hulking, killing beasts. They have their hulking, killing form, but they keep their wits about them when they're in the forms, and they don't turn based on the moon. In fact, their moon phase that they are born under determines what they are in werewolf society, which is known as their auspice. It's not always the full moon that they're associated with, though the full moon does tend to give them some power. They are still hurt by silver, is one thing that holds, and basically instead of being creatures of darkness or whatever evil generic thing they are instead tied with the earth spirit Gaia, the spirit of earth itself, And their goal and their reason for being created, along with some other shapeshifters such as werecats and were-spiders, is that they protect Gaia from a coming decay known as the worm. Because in the Werewolf the Apocalypse universe, there is what is known as the triad. It is 3 cosmic forces that keep the universe in check. The wild, which is what the werewolves are associated with and Gaia is associated with, represents chaos, nature, and birth and whatnot. Whereas the weaver represents the opposite. It represents order and lack of passion and just clockwork thinking and whatnot. It is mostly associated with humans and is also a force that the werewolves tend to fight, although it's not as big of a problem as the worm, which is the final part of the triad. It represents death and decay, but also of rebirth. But the problem is that the worm has kind of gone a bit insane and is now just trying to burn the entirety of everything down to the ground. In fact, that's what the title refers to. The apocalypse that it refers to is the worm basically destroying the entirety of the earth and possibly even further out into the spirit realm and any other worlds that are beyond. And the werewolves are the ones that are trying to stop it. Going through this article, some of the things that I see him talking about and some of the other stuff that I've just heard about the game in general sounds like there are some fairly solid gameplay mechanics that they have in mind, with a few questions here and there. For example, the rage system for the game sounds really good. It sounds like they're really going to put an emphasis on the when will you rage aspect of Werewolf the Apocalypse, where just seeing all the destruction and decaying of their world around them causes the werewolves to lose their sanity for a bit and go into a big blood fury. Well, at least that's one of the frenzies they can go into. Apparently they forgot about fox frenzies, but whatever, that's fine. We can skip over that. So far, the rage system sounds pretty decent, although I find it kind of weird that it says here that the rage rises as he learns about problems humans have caused, such as pollution and greed. There are other reasons that werewolves go into frenzies and rage. Hell, even in the core rulebook, things such as feeling strong emotions, not just anger, but also sadness and even strong lust can cause them to go into frenzies, as well as being injured or seeing their packmates be injured. Speaking of packmates, that's another thing that they said they want to emphasize, is that there'll be some kind of pack system in the game, whether it be that they are NPCs that help you or they'll accompany you on quests. You know, who knows, but it sounds like they really want to put an emphasis on that, which is good. Packs are a very important part of the Garou. It also sounds like the forms are being implemented pretty well, that you will shift through 3 different forms of human, werewolf, and wolf with different goals. Human being to blend into society, interact with people and whatnot. The wolf being for tracking, scouting out areas, and stealth, whereas obviously the werewolf will be for combat. Now, I wonder if they know that there are actually 2 other forms that the Garou have. See, in the actual tabletop, there are 5 different forms. There is Hamid, the human form, where they look no different than a normal human. Glabro, which is their near-human form, where they look like classical werewolves, where they have elongated teeth and more body hair and whatnot, like classic wolfman looking. Then you've got Krenos, which is their quote-unquote werewolf form. That's their big, hulking, murder everything in front of them form. Then there's Hispo, which is the near-wolf form, where they take the form of a direwolf, which are stronger but less agile than normal wolves. And then they have their Lupus, which is their normal wolf form, where they're indistinguishable from an average everyday wolf. Maybe slightly bigger, but other than that, they look pretty much the same. So I guess they're not going to implement the other 2 forms, which is kind of understandable. I mean, especially Glabro. Almost nobody used Glabro when I did the tabletop. There really isn't much of a point to it. Hispo, on the other hand, was actually used quite a bit, because it's basically the wolf form, but more better in combat, stronger, does more damage kind of thing. I also find it weird they never mention using any kind of weapons or firearms or bows, because that's another reason that you would use your human form a good bit. Your Homid form is because you would use it to fire guns, which is a big part of the game because it takes place in modern day and usually takes place in city settings as well, because that's where they mostly fight the worm and the weaver. They also mentioned hub worlds. There will be 2 different hub worlds, and that the game will take place in the Pacific Northwest, so probably around the Seattle or Oregon area if I had to guess. Probably Seattle, although I find it funny that if that's the case that both of the upcoming World of Darkness games are set in Seattle. But regardless, we'll see. But 2 different hub worlds. I could see it being one being a city and the other being a tribal camp, for instance, which I think would be good. They also mentioned that there is going to be venturing into the Penumbra, which is the spirit world that werewolves and other shapeshifters have access to. But it says that they only seem to be going into the Penumbra, not the deeper Umbra. And I find that's a little bit of a disappointment, because the Umbra is an absolutely fascinating place, and there are plenty of deep realms in the Umbra that would be really good for video game settings. But it's fine. If it's their first foray into making a Werewolf the Apocalypse game, I understand not getting too in-depth into the deep realms in the Umbra and whatnot, and just keeping it to the Penumbra, where you maybe can stealthily travel around through areas and talk to this waterfall spirit they mention and whatnot. So there are plenty of good things that sound about this game. It sounds like the gameplay is going to be solid. My problems that I'm noticing here are all from a story and lore perspective. First, let's start with the big elephant in the room. There's no character customization. Coming from Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, where you could pick your clan and define your character based off of it, and the gameplay could change radically with certain clans, like if you went the Nosferatu, where you had to play completely stealth-based, or the Malkavians that were basically insane and had completely different dialogue and saw things that no other character type saw, where you could, have conversations with stop signs, for instance. Yes, that was in the game. Malkavians are awesome. But now it sounds like that's not going to be a part of it. There are 13 werewolf tribes that are so varied in their motivations, their abilities, and their styles of going about things. But instead we're limiting it. This main character, Cahal, is part of the, or at least was previously part of the Fianna clan, which are a tribe of Irish, hard drinking, hard partying, but also battle bard type werewolves. A pretty neat clan, but I don't know, it just seems kind of a weird tribe to go for. If anything, I thought if it's set in the Northwest and it's going to be near Seattle or another big city up there, that you would play as a glasswalker. But while we're on the subject of talking about the player character here, let's go back to that one line at the beginning of the video that had so many people worried about how this game will turn out. I'd promise never to use these powers again, but some promises you can't keep. So why is that a concerning line? Well, it kind of shows that the main character is ashamed of what he is. He's ashamed of being a Garu. He's ashamed of what he has to do. And that makes 0 sense to people, because not only does it not fit a Garu to be ashamed of what he is, most Garu, especially Fianna Garu, would be loud and proud of what they are, and they would take down the worm at every opportunity they can. And if they die for the glory of the Garu and the glory of Gaia. But it seems like Cahal has turned his back on the Garu, turned his back on Gaia, and doesn't want to use his powers anymore. He wants to suppress it and live a normal life, which is so out of character for most Garu, and especially a Fianna, that it just has people concerned. And not only that, it is not what Werewolf the Apocalypse is about, because if the main character is going to be in angst of his condition, which being a Garu isn't even a condition, it's not a curse, it's a gift to like 99.9% of Garu. But if it's going to have angst about the condition, then it should be a Vampire the Masquerade character, not a Werewolf the Apocalypse character. In Werewolf the Apocalypse, the angst is about the condition that the world is in, not the quote-unquote condition that they have. It's about the fact they're fighting a bloody, horrible, and a war that they're probably going to lose in the end, but damn it, they're going to go down fighting if they're going to die. And it's it's concerning. People don't want to play a character in this kind of setting that's angsty about their condition. Hell, even in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, the character is not angsty about their condition at all. I mean, you can see in the background footage of Vampire the Masquerade that Jack talks about how exciting and all the cool benefits that you get for being a vampire. But there are plenty of other settings that could have gone if you wanted to be angsty about your condition, which some comments are kind of pointing out that maybe the developers were originally going to make a Bloodlines 2, but they got stuck on this at the last minute once they learned that they already had another company doing Bloodlines 2. And if that's the case, they have my sympathy, but Werewolf the Apocalypse is still an awesome setting. But this is just the beginning of the issues when it comes to talking about the lore and characters. The thing that gets me, though, is it specifically says that Cahal is and they use this exact term, an eco-terrorist. And this is where I really need to start bringing in. Because to an untrained observer, yes, the Garou in Werewolf the Apocalypse might seem like eco-terrorists, but it goes much, much deeper than that. The worm is much more than just pollution and the humans destroying the environment. It is also planting insidious ideas in people's heads. It is also poisoning them with food and alcohol and stuff that they make themselves. It is turning humanity against the concept of the wild, against this concept of Gaia. I mean, it's also radiation and other just horrible things. It's more than just pollution. The things that Penteks and other worm-aligned things do is horrifying, not just on a simple environmental level, but just in general. Look at the worm spawns. Look at the things you fight. They're horrifying. The things that Banes do when they possess people is equally horrifying. And that's to say nothing of the Black Spiral Dancers, but we'll get to that in a bit. But being an eco-terrorist is even more ludicrous for being a Fianna. I have never thought of the Fianna as being eco-terrorists. If anything, if they wanted to make the main character an eco-terrorist, he should have been part of something like the Red Talons, for instance. Speaking of the tribes, we need to talk about this. Assuming that everything I'm reading on this Wikipedia page is true, the overall stereotyped assumptions that these developers have about the tribes is very worrying. Like, on here, for example, they list a couple of example clans. The Glasswalkers think that humanity can get out of environmental problems with the use of technology. Wrong. The Glasswalkers embrace human technology and believe that the other tribes that tend to stick to their old tribal and primitive natures are falling behind, and that if they want to fight the worm, they have to integrate with humans, and they have to understand their ways, their technology, and they ally humans against the worm and use technology, use corporations and whatnot to their benefit. And we're just getting started. Continuing, the Black Furies fight for feminism, women's rights, and gender equality. Wrong. Well, okay, you're partially right. I will admit that the Black Furies are kind of basically radical feminists that hate men a lot, and that is not exaggerating. That's really how they are. Except that saying that they fight for gender equality is the same misstep that people saying that modern third-wave feminism is the big hurdle, because they hate men. They literally refuse to let any men into their tribe unless they are medices. So, yeah, that's, I guess, closer than these other examples, but still pretty far off. The Bonars care about social class and fight for economically oppressed people. No, not really. Basically, the Bonars would be like if you took the Glasswalkers, remove their obsession with technology, and make it more that they care about humans. And they just usually end up being kind of in the slums and dregs of society, yes, but they also use that to gather underground information. They tend to be involved with the criminal underworld as opposed to the organized crime that the Glasswalkers tend to be involved with. They gather information, they care for humans that are the downtrodden of society, but they don't necessarily fight for them. And they don't really care about social class. Literally saying the bone gnawers care about social class is wrong. They instead don't care about social class. They don't care about the ruling Garu elite. They just fight because they have to fight. They're survivors. And then the Get of Fenris would like to wage war against humanity to see who will survive. Very, very wrong. There has not been a single line in every freaking Werewolf the Apocalypse book that I have read that say that the Get of Fenris want to wage war on humanity to see who will survive. The Get of Fenris are Norse and Viking based warriors that value honor and their kinfolk above all. They are honor-bound fighters against the worm. They are probably the strongest physically fighting tribe that the Garu have. They're a little sexist, yeah, and I'm surprised they didn't mention that with all of the social commentary they're throwing in here. But wage war on you, oh, that makes my brain hurt with how incorrect it is. No, if anything, some other tribes, such as the Silver Fangs, or look down on humanity, or no. While we're at it, remember how I mentioned that if Cahal was going to be an eco-terrorist, he should be a Red Talon? Yeah, that's who should be taking this label that they're giving the Get of Fenris, are the Red Talons, because the Red Talons want to wipe out humanity. They are only wolf-born, and maybe a few metis in their tribe, but they're mostly lupus, and they just want to wipe out humanity because they think that, well, humanity is causing all these problems and making the Weaver and the Worm stronger, so we have to wipe them out. If you're gonna, first of all, if you're gonna make Cahal an eco-terrorist, you should have been a Red Talon. Second of all, if you were going to say that any tribe wanted to, quote, wage war on humanity to see who will survive, it should be the Red Talons. For the love of God, guys, you said that you loved Vampire the Masquerade and you loved the source material. If that's the case, pick up a Werewolf the Apocalypse rule book and read. Pick up any of the novels and read. Look at some of the actual plays and role plays that people did for this and read. This is not what these tribes are like. Jesus Christ. Next, they're going to boil it down to the children of Gaia are a bunch of orgiastic hippies that just want everyone to be peaceful, man. No. Literally, it says in the core rule book, and I quote, that even the most placid child of Gaia, when they go into rage, can be one, quote, scary mother. Like, and this is just the base of the problems. Like, the sheer level of just misrepresentation of these tribes is staggering. But then, finally, the one thing that, aside from the misrepresentation of the tribes, what has gotten me the most? They seem to not understand a whole lot about what you're supposed to be fighting. They mentioned that you're going to be fighting Penteks, which is accurate to the tabletop. Penteks is a big multinational corporation that has its talons in everything. Penteks is the original and overarching entity that was originally an oil company, but they have several subsidiaries, including computers and toy manufacturers, video game manufacturers, a tabletop manufacturer. They have a hacker group that is clearly based off of Anonymous, media corporation, etc., etc. But here's the thing. They say that Penteks is a vampire-run corporation. What? No. As far as I know, if there are any vampires in Penteks, they are flying under the radar. It is most assuredly not led by them. They have an entire book that I own dedicated to talking about the worm and talking about Penteks in particular. And there is not a vampire on their main board. I'll double check and make sure that there isn't, and I'll update if there is. But no. The head and the higher-ups in Penteks are either humans, Fomorians, which are humans possessed by worm spirits, or they're what I have never seen ever mentioned in the entirety that they have talked about when it came to this game, black spiral dancers. Hello, guys. Did you forget about these crazy mofos? Apparently you have, and that really disappoints me. See, the Black Spiral Dancers are basically an entirely worm-corrupted tribe of werewolves, of the Garu. They were originally the White Howlers, but the White Howlers got too haughty and tried to fight the worm directly. Their entire tribe fell to the worm, and you now have Black Spiral Dancers. And they are completely batshit insane. If you learn anything from reading about them in the Book of the Worm or in the core rulebook, they are completely insane, or at least most of them are. Some of the the more level-headed ones at least, the less insane ones and more simply sociopathic ones, tend to be part of the higher-ups in Penteks. They lead squads of Fomori and whatnot. And they are basically, along with Penteks and worm spirits, the major threat that the Garu face. It's Penteks and their subsidiaries, worm spirits and banes, and Black Spiral Dancers. That's your trio of main enemies that you fight. Vampires are like a tertiary, or whatever, the fourth down quadnary, I don't know, enemy that you fight, because they're worm tainted, but they're not major enemies. Like, to go back to a previous example, in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, werewolves were not featured as a major enemy. They appeared at one point in the game, and that was it. Vampires don't... Oh my... How could you forget Black Spiral Dancers? Like, there's so much you could do with the Black Spiral Dancers. They serve as a dark mirror for the Garu to look into to see what will happen if they become as haughty as the White Howlers. Like, it's a very good story aspect to throw in there. And they're also completely irredeemable villains. The best way I can describe them in the quickest sense is that they're a bunch of insane werewolves that bang each other in giant pits of radiation and garbage. Literally, one of their hives is inside of the corpse of a giant worm creature, for Christ's sake. Like, you had a perfect dark mirror and irredeemable villain here that you could use, but they haven't mentioned Black Spiral Dancers once. They could serve as excellent villains, excellent bosses, or they have the same abilities that you do, or at least similar but worm-tainted abilities. I hope they bring in the Black Spiral Dancers, but they haven't mentioned them once. Instead, they focus on vampire-led, wrong, Corporation of Penteks. So it sounds like you're mostly going to be fighting vampires, which is not going to be a challenge, because in the World of Darkness, a werewolf of the same age and skill level as a vampire will beat them 99.9% of the time. So yeah, I'm still cautiously optimistic about this whole thing. Most of the gameplay sounds interesting, but I don't know. A lot of this stuff really has me concerns that the gameplay might be relatively good, but that their knowledge of the lore and their knowledge of the source material is so woefully lacking that it's not even funny. I'm worried that the game will just suffer because of it, but who knows? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic, but my optimism is quickly fading. And I'm clearly not the only one. I wouldn't have noticed how bad this whole thing had gotten if I hadn't seen the angry comments. Not just about the lack of customization, but just how they know nothing about the source material. It's supposed to release in 2020. Hopefully we get some more info. Maybe they'll change things. I mean, I doubt they're going to change into a customizable character and whatnot, but at least hopefully they'll go back and look at the story a bit better and fix all these errors that they've made, or possibly that these articles are over-exaggerating things and that it won't end up the way it is. They're just misrepresenting it. We'll have to wait and see. I just hope that both of these World of Darkness games turn out good, especially this one, because people know Vampire the Masquerade from Bloodlines and how good Bloodlines was. And I would really like them to get introduced to the other World of Darkness games aside from Vampire the Masquerade. This was a perfect opportunity to do it, but I'm afraid they're going to mess it up. I'm afraid they're going to portray the werewolves as being completely unsympathetic, and these different tribes as being just flanderized, stereotypical versions of what they really are, at best, and just alienating to players at absolute worst. But anyone who does have interest in it, go check out the books, go find a GM or a storyteller that is willing to do a game. Play it for yourselves and look at the source material and look at how good it was on its own. But this was a rant, and thankfully I didn't get as angry as I was worried I would. But some of the stuff that they do just really has me infuriated. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you next time.